Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are actually recording this episode a little earlier than we normally do. We're recording this one on Tuesday afternoon. So just to place ourselves in time, normally we release the podcast, sometime Wednesday afternoon. Obviously, this is June the 25th. This is actually election day, election night. So you may we are the key point here is that we're doing this before the primaries, before we know the results of New York 16, the Bowman race, and before any other, if there are any other huge surprises that are coming tonight, we don't know about them yet. But the big thing this week, which presumably which this pod will come out in advance of, is the presidential debate, which is Thursday night, the first, and it it could end up being the only presidential debate. Back in 2020, I think on the last podcast we had the numbers wrong. There were supposed to be three. There ended up being two. Then President Trump got COVID. Uh, that had led to the cancellation of one. But I make this point that when Donald Trump is involved, you can't take anything for granted. At the moment, they're down for two debates, and I guess there's even a possibility that they could, add one of the others that has been proposed by a media organization. But that second one, I believe, is scheduled for September, and that's like, you know, that might as well be as far off as when there's multiple colonies on Mars, right? That's the distant future in this election. So this could be the only one, depending on what happens. And I think everyone is is looking ahead to this debate with a high degree of what I guess I would call uncertainty and openness to the unexpected. Because in the old days, you had two kind of professional politicians and candidates, and they're going to have a face off. They're going to have their own canned zinger lines. Everybody's hoping for the breakout moment or something like that. But when you have Donald Trump, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what version of the guy is going to show up. He's going to try to do stuff to put everyone off balance. And as we know from Trump, there's no thing that he could do that he is going to say or his advisors are going to say, "Oh, dude, that's too crazy. You can't do that." The whole country's watching, right? And Joe Biden is that guy, right? He's not going to do something crazy, but his supporters are going to be nervous that there's some moment that is going to go viral on YouTube, right? If he stumbles over something or forgets a name or something like that. So, in very different ways, we have all of this, high degree of uncertainty going into this debate. You kind of feel like anything could happen, and maybe it can, right? Which is ironic in a way, considering that these are two men who are like what Joe Biden is 81 and Donald Trump is what 77 or 78. I can't remember exactly. These are both two old guys, so it's there is something odd and a little perverse that going into it has this kind of strong sort of Thunderdome vibe, right? Like this as if these were two feral college kids or something like that. In any case, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about one reasonably big Supreme Court case that has already come out, and what actually ends up being it's a big deal for a lot of people in the country, but is a particularly big deal for us at TPM because we, choose, I don't know, Kate will tell us specifically, but 10, a dozen of these Supreme Court cases that we're going to follow really closely. And I believe there are, Kate, is it 2 or 3 decision days now that they've announced? 3 this week. Okay. So, and at the end of the day, as we have found out to our chagrin many times over the last few years, at the end of the day, Supreme Court can do anything it wants, but they're basically kind of up against the end of the month. The decisions are supposed to be done by the end of the month, and we're pretty much there. And most of the biggies haven't come out yet, so we could be in a pretty big news week and pretty big rights loss week uh, in the last 3 days of this week. So that's all coming. But we're going to talk about the gun case that was already decided. So anyway, Kate, I know that these big Joe Biden appearances provoke a tremendous amount of angst on your part, and you are probably not alone, although experience it maybe more than most. How are you holding up?
I mean, I doubt that even the political junkiest person is like looking forward to this debate. I mean, it could go well for the side of democracy, but I still doubt it'll be pleasant in any kind of reading of the word. It's kind of like when you have to get dental work done and the lead up sucks and the experience sucks, and then there's usually some pain afterwards, but you kind of have to tell yourself like, well, it's good in the long term, right? It's kind of like that. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. So we've talked about this before, and I think it's a really live question, like, to what degree does a debate matter anymore, right? I mean, we are in a time where there are many fewer debates than there used to be. Starting in 2016, for some odd reason, studies show a huge upswing in like personal acrimony and personal attacks in debates, and a downswing in their substantive uh you know weightiness. This debate is only important because Trump's entire theory of the case is premised on Joe Biden having dementia, basically. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And so this is so important, not because the men both have, large, important kind of policy stances, and we need to pit against each other how they both feel about, Medicare and America's place on the global stage. Like, no one actually thinks that Trump has any policy ideas. I think even the people who like him don't think that. This is solely to show that Joe Biden is alive and well and fit enough to have another term. And then on the flip side, the great benefit is that if Trump is himself and is, kind of a lunatic, that reminds people this is what he's like, the people who haven't been paying any attention. Now, of course, the concern is either that Biden performs very badly and gives fodder to the, brain oozing out of his ears narrative, or that Trump, like he did after that, I think it was the early Iowa caucus, manages to do his kind of fake statesman thing, and shield or veil the part of himself that is so crazy. I'm honestly less concerned about the Trump piece because he has never proven himself able to do the faux statesman thing for more than 10 minutes at a time. And this is going to have all kinds of triggers for him, is going to have Biden attacks. He's going to what he perceives as moderator attacks when they ask him about, January 6th, or did he lose in 2020. But all this being said, one of the more interesting things to me is that it's a kind of an old chestnut in politics, right? This downplaying your own expectations before debates. And it's always been pretty silly, and it's always manifested itself in kind of crazy ways. Like, way back they were calling John Kerry like the greatest orator since Cicero, right? Before the debate. And then Obama against McCain, so ridiculous because Obama came to national prominence through his communication skills. But before that debate, they were like, McCain has decades of experience doing Senate floor speeches. What has our guy got against that? As if, Senate floor speeches are anything more than like a senator reading from a printed out sheet of paper to an empty chamber. But this is as old as we've had debates. There's been, you try to manage expectations, you lower your own and raise those of your opponent. And Trump is kind of trying to do that with Biden, but he cannot. I mean, he's never had message discipline, right? And he doesn't have it now. So he'll try to do this thing of, he kicked Paul Ryan's ass. I hope we all remember that. And then that doesn't really get a big reaction. So then he's back to, and he's going to be snorting cocaine before this debate. We all know it. They're going to have him hopped up. He's going to be kind of out of his mind, but don't be fooled. That's not the real Joe Biden. So he can't even really stay on message with this whole, actually he's a great debater, which makes sense because it's completely, it doesn't fit in at all with what he's been doing for the last like years, which is painting Biden as kind of a sniveling, 1 foot in the ground kind of old bag of bones.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's just not. It's not Trump. And I thought when I heard the things about Paul Ryan, they probably his people probably got him wound up on that because Paul Ryan is an enemy on a different channel, right? He's, what is it? Paul Ryan is saying I don't know exactly what Paul Ryan, but a slightly older version of the Paul Ryan we remember is like hitting the airwaves. I don't even know what he said. It's not friendly to Trump.
But like it's mildly not friendly.
Yeah, like I'm not even sure. Does he say he won't vote for him? He just kind of says he's lame or whatever it is. But the point is that they need to sort of, triangulate him to saying something positive about Biden. And there's the stuff about they're going to give him the performance enhancing drugs, and as it's as with many things with Trump, it's so deeply silly. What is the there's no performance enhancing drug that takes someone the way they claim Biden is and makes them normal for 6 hours. You can take Adderall or something, and maybe if you can take various versions of speed, but that's not what we're talking. It's so silly. And like, wow, if there's really a drug that takes someone who's scattered and can't focus and has no memory and brings them up to speed, wow, some drug company is going to make a lot of money, and some families are going to be rescued from the sadness of the long goodbye, right? I mean, it's the whole thing is so inane. And there is it has become a cliche, but it is actually deeply illuminating and explanatory that almost everything Trump does can be understood through the prism of professional wrestling. Right? There's all this stuff to create these kind of histrionic, dramatic tension moments in the lead up to something. There's a lot of doing things to kind of get everybody back on their heels. And some of the things to get everyone back on their heels are actually just sort of not even things you expect will get anybody back on their heels, but they're just sort of golden oldies that you'll give a try to. Like the Trump people have been on it for a week or 10 days attacking Jake Tapper, who's going to be one of the moderators of the CNN debates, him and Dana Bash. He's biased, he's this, he's that, and blah, 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 blah. And then they had this Trump's spokeswoman go on CNN a couple days ago. She started, the interview had nothing to do with Jake Tapper, or I think even the debate. She started going off on Jake Tapper, and the interviewer, Casey Hunt, just said, "All right, we're done," and cut short the interview, kind of like, "You're not going to sit here and just, attack my colleague." And then then the spokeswoman goes on Steve Bannon's show, who's not in jail yet somehow, right? Even though I think he's already been rejected by the Supreme Court. So I don't know what the holdup is, but goes on and they're saying CNN has to apologize to Donald Trump after this outrage of cutting. So all of these, again, playing the refs, just trying to just throw up a million shiny objects at once, all pro wrestling. I did a post this morning, sort of like, it feels a little stale to me now. We've seen this so many times from him. Even the people who kind of maybe have an interest in getting wound up in it, I feel like it's kind of hard for them to quite get there. I don't know. What's your sense about that, Kate?
Well, I was going to add also, one of my favorite things about the Biden is on this like special drug premise is that he's senile. There's a drug that makes him not senile, but they will only give it to him before the first debate, right? Otherwise, they let him just wander around bumping into things during the G7 and everything.
Yeah. No, totally. Well, let me just say one quick other thing. I do think, and this will be one of the very interesting things to see about it, not having an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Even if Trump has an unfriendly audience, he can make that work for him because he knows there's a bigger audience, right? So you get booed and you're like, oh, boo. So, just he I think he is often kind of lost when without a partner, which an audience is for him, to kind of intuitively feel where it's at, get them excited, get them angry. Because I do think a lot of his stuff just lands differently when it's just the four of them, and you kind of go off, and I'm sure like a Jake Tapper's looking like, what, like, okay, what was that about? I'm not saying it's going to be like a disaster for Trump. I think it'll be, we see him in one-on-one interviews. It's not, but those tend to go kind of weirdly. So it'll just be interesting to see how he navigates that.
And it's funny because the no audience like changes the incentive structure a little bit, right? Like the old kind of way to quote unquote win a debate is to have the big soundbite zingiest zinger of the night, which is how we get, oh my God, I mean, how many debates of these like stupid, clearly canned, pre-prepared lines that they're trying to find some way to kind of shoehorn in semi-organically. But I mean, like you say, when you have no crowd to react, there's no point in being funny or zingy, it does kind of remove a little bit of the performative aspect in terms of kind of immediate feedback and winning the moment kind of thing.
Well, I think to me, I think there's still an incentive to be zingy or funny. But the key is you don't know when you're being zingy or funny, right? You got the crowd there. You kind of feel it. You work it, right? You kind of feel when you're getting in the groove. But here, like I think that if one of them just has some kind of epic takedown that just is a moment we're going to be watching 20 years from now, that's still a big deal, but you just don't know. And also kind of like it's sort of like watching in the old days how they used to have, sitcoms with a laugh track. Without the laugh track, you don't know when you're supposed to laugh unless it's really damn funny, right?
Right. So I was listening to Dan Pfeiffer talk about this, a former Obama guy who had also worked on like the Gore campaign. And he was talking about how reception of debates completely changed with the advent of Twitter in particular. Because before, reporters would kind of decide who won based on their experience of the
Yep.
debate, right? So it would be, if somebody was just kind of more old school, more like better on policy or whatever, it's like that's the person who kind of won the debate. And then you have the advent of Twitter where the reporters can both listen and watch how quote unquote kind of stakeholders are reacting. And in that first, terrible Obama Romney debate where Romney really kind of wiped the floor with Obama, and Obama seemed like he was above it all and didn't want to be there. And it was the only big crisis moment for that campaign. Part of the reason why Obama came off the stage and thought it had kind of gone fine and the staff was in a complete panic was because, Andrew Sullivan, then still kind of a liberal, or at least an Obama supporter, was like melting down, and Chris Matthews was melting down, and everyone was saying, like, oh my God, the election's over, Romney's won. And that completely changed how that debate was, packaged, sent out, received, remembered.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's instructive this time because with no audience, it is going to be a little bit more reliant on how this is spun because you are not going to have these like in the moment reactions to kind of take cues from. And
Yep.
I mean, that already compounds something we talked about last episode a lot, which is, we're in the era of short video clips, right? So I think this is a debate where unless there's some like unbelievably kind of lopsided performance, so much of it is going to end up kind of getting hashed out afterwards and formed and molded after it happens.
Yeah, it's funny when I'm not sure if I have done this for a long time when I would, cover, react to whatever State of the Unions, debates, whatever these kind of, kind of tentpole moments in a campaign or a presidency or whatever. I would always do this thing where I would just, it's done. I'm just going to write out my thoughts, and not look at everything else because it is impossible to stick with what you thought after you see what everyone else thought and what everyone else thought through the prism of social media and certain things taking off and becoming viral, because it you it's not that you change your mind, but you start reacting to what everyone else thought. Well, I don't agree with what everyone else thought, or so you can't avoid it. And it's not a matter of that I thought, kind of like I need the sort of the, you know, un uncontaminated Josh Marshall take, but I thought it was more valuable to see what was my actual take before I found out what everyone else thought. Right. Just to kind of, because otherwise, because what everybody else talking about. You don't need me to tell you. And I was just kind of curious what my own sense. But the other thing with this, and this is true in has been true of other debates besides Donald Trump debates and Joe Biden debates. In some ways, it's even more the case now that what we're looking for at all is, it's very meta, because at a basic level, 100% I can tell you what's going to happen. Joe Biden is going to make a number of pretty standard policy points. He's going to focus on things he thinks he did well. He's going to play up stuff that he thinks was very bad about Trump, but he wants to remind. Okay, that's what he's going to do. He's going to talk, relatively intelligently about policy, and he's going to debate in the way politicians basically debate. Donald Trump is going to say a bunch of nonsensical things in policy terms, things that make no sense. He's probably going to act inappropriately, at least at some key points. And that's what's going to happen. 100%, that's what's going to happen. Now, all we're concerned about is kind of the sort of the fine print of how that kind of plays out. And even the fine print, and this is what I mean by like how we think about these things that we call debates in presidential terms. Even the fine print is basically going to come down to how commentators think it will affect this small percentage of the population that is actually kind of open-minded about who they're going to vote for. So it's extremely meta. There's not even like even that point that I was making about kind of like giving your undigested view before you expose yourself to social media and see what everyone else thought. Even the undigested or the uncontaminated view is basically like, here's my very experienced, very canny interpretation of what the 8% of the electorate who knows nothing about politics and is actually up for grabs thinks. And in a certain sense, since I'm a political junkie and I only spend time with other political junkies, how on earth would I know what those people think? They're total weirdos. They're completely ignorant about what's happening in the politics of the country. So it's a very meta and kind of weird thing that we're about to do.
I mean, to some degree, we can even get more granular than what we just said. Like, we even know which topics both of them are going to want to talk the most about. I'm sure we could, if we just sat down and did it, could write a slate of questions that looks more or less exactly like what the moderators are going to ask. No, you're totally right. I mean, this just feels a little bit almost like the State of the Union. We knew what Biden was going to talk about, right? Like, we could have basically written the speech. It's not like there were any moments in there where we were like, egads, I wasn't expecting that, right? Like, we know that on Thursday, Biden's going to try to steer the conversation back to Dobbs as much as he can. He's going to take shots at the Supreme Court. He's going to bring up January 6th. He's going to talk about his legislative achievements. He's going to talk about what he inherited from Trump, what the country looked like when he took over. And, as you say, on any policy things, Trump's going to give word salads. He's going to probably bring up Hunter and try to upset Joe Biden. He's going to do deep state shit. I'm sure they're going to ask him, so did you lose the 2020 election? And he's going to do some kind of end run around that. It really does come down to we're fighting an election on the terrain of 30-second clips. It's just so small for this huge thing that we're fighting over.
The one thing I am genuinely interested in is he will certainly get a question. Maybe it'll be the same question, but he will certainly get a question about, did you lose the 2020 election and January 6th? And with the 2020 election, look, we've seen him get asked this a million times. He is not, I guess, what is it? He did an NBC interview with Lester Holt, like a year ago? He's done a couple mainstream media interviews, but very few. And those are they're few and far between, and they're not going to be edited. They're not going to be edited in his favor necessarily in those ones. But that's still a little different from it's live. It's live. Joe Biden's there. He can say something. He can come back. So and we've seen so many cases where you're talking to like Hannity or something, and he's like, it was rigged. Everybody agrees it was rigged. There was 1 million votes, and this is what this sort of ref playing with Jake Tapper is about. I would expect Tapper comes back and says, dude, there was no million votes. You lost. Like, no, that's not what you just said is not true. And that's an awkward moment. And I do think I know what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of get in Tapper's head a little bit. I should make clear Dana Bash is also there. They're trying to get in his head a little bit. Just how much do you land that one? Like, do you kind of say, well, there's no evidence for what you said, but now we have to move along? Or do you say kind of like, dude, you lost. What you just said is completely false. And don't Americans have a right to expect when you lose, you'll admit you lost, to really kind of, because the moderators aren't there to make themselves the story or to, land some righteous blow for like the American way, right? And all that kind of stuff. But in many ways, that is sort of like the fulcrum of this whole election. Like, kind of like, you ran last time and you didn't admit you lost. So like, what the fuck? Like, that's sort of like, that's the calling card of entry in participating in democratic politics. If you're not going to abide by the rules. So it's I'm curious. So I'm really curious what he will say about January 6th. What he will say about the 2020 election. The basic thing about, will he just kind of in front of everybody still claim, yeah, I won? And then the other thing is, with the Jan 6 stuff, he has done most of his hostages, freedom fighters, patriot stuff kind of on the down low, in the way that you can do that on like OANN or Newsmax or something like that. I still think for most people in this country, if you're like, yeah, that was awesome, and those people are hostages and they're freedom fighters and I'm going to pardon them, I think that'll land pretty poorly. And I think he knows that. So, that creates a little drama for me. I'm curious what he'll say.
I'm also interested by what he said at a recent rally where, he was just doing his kind of off the cuff rambling, and he was saying a lot of people expected me not to do the debate because fake news CNN. And he was like, I'll be fighting 3 people up on that stage instead of 1, which is, well, it's so classic Trump that it's not interesting, but it's interesting in terms of if that is his posture, to be like really aggressive towards the moderators. His base will probably love that, but normal people do not like it. I mean, we've seen again and again that even kind of Trump nose holders, like, they don't like the aggression. It makes them uncomfortable with the kind of breaking norm things that, in this case, you have these people who are supposed to be referees, and then you're just kind of yelling at the referees the whole time. And also, if that is his posture, that takes a huge burden off of Biden to have to, like, spar with him or kind of keep him answering the questions or on topic or whatever. Because if you have, and you would kind of expect from these 2 moderators, like, I think moderation is such a hard thing in debates, but I have like reasonably high expectations out of these 2 journalists in particular. But if they are in a more like hostile exchange with Trump, where they're always being like, you're not answering the question, you're just kind of giving us word salad, kind of sticking him to the particulars. If that is the dynamic, which it's not hard to imagine it will be, that just puts Biden in such an easier place, because he just then has to stand there and kind of be the normal one and like answer questions coherently and not get pulled down into the mud with Trump. And then all of a sudden he's like looking shining in comparison. And now the question is, can you do that in a debate with Trump, whose whole strategy is bully and steamroll the other person until they just like can't do the job? And that's where we'll see how much the muting of the mics kind of comes into play, and whether the kind of little questions of, is Biden going to be able to hear what he's saying when the mics are muted? Are the podiums going to be far enough away that as soon as his mic is cut, he is genuinely like silenced and it's just Biden? Those are all kind of open questions, I think.
I think this is one big point that we don't know whether they're going to, there are some debates where the people, I mean, there was actually, I do remember the Joe Biden Paul Ryan debate in what that was, 2012. um that case, they were like 5 or 6 feet apart. I mean, they literally could like reach out each other's hands, and I think they did. They may have shaken hands or something like that. So extremely close. Maybe this will be the way it was, in 2020, where they're 20 feet apart. But think about it: you're 20 feet from someone, you can hear them. You can totally hear them. Everyone can hear them. In fact, I'm pretty sure they'll get picked up on the mics. But all it does is basically make it hard for the mic turned down person to kind of talk over you, like but that's not it. It's a funny thing because you don't hear yourself on the mic. You hear yourself. You're listening to your own voice, and so it's a little. It is for the people there who are the only people who matter in terms of the cadence of the performance. Those people are not going to hear that. It's not, that one of these things where in kind of a joke movie where you kind of click the controller and like you turn off the volume of the person you don't like. It doesn't work that way. So he can still be talking over, and so it's a little it's unclear to me just how that will affect the cadence of things. I think it's, look, it's one of these things where if you're a Biden supporter and you're nervous about this, at a certain level, you've got to say to yourself, if I think this guy should be president, I need to have confidence that he can handle himself for 90 minutes with Donald Trump. And I do, because we've seen this before. We've seen them do this. And I'm not sure he's going to have some devastating smackdown of Trump, because as we've said, the lack of an audience kind of takes away some of that ambient tension, and the way that even when they have told the audience, don't clap, don't say anything, when there's really a kind of an epic, a huge smackdown, there's still some reaction. But I think it'll be fine. And, fundamentally, I think this is an opportunity for Biden, unmediated, to say really clearly, this dude resorted to violence the last time we did this. He's not safe. He also banned abortion. And he left the country a disaster. And I've been cleaning it up. Just those points. And for Trump to be weird. And that's kind of what I think some version of that will happen.
So speaking of kind of unanswered questions around the debate, we, as you mentioned in the intro, we have 3 Supreme Court decision days this week: Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We're butting up against July. So, I mean, there's a chance they'll dump all the remaining 12 or so in these next 3 days, or it might expand into next week. But of course, one of those decisions we're waiting on is the Trump immunity decision, part of Jack Smith's long-stalled January 6th prosecution, where, based on oral arguments, it seems that the likeliest outcome is sending the case back down to the district court to sort between which charges in the indictment fall under the umbrella of official acts and which fall under private acts. The conservatives seemed as a whole pretty hostile to the government during oral arguments on this, but not quite inclined to go as far as Trump wanted them to, which is to say all of this is fine, presidents are immune, he kind of gets off scot-free. So, we're waiting for that. We're getting another big emergency room abortion case. We're getting huge cases on, administrative state kind of stuff, which get a lot fewer headlines, but are also central to the grander kind of Republican right-wing legal world campaign, and that would be kind of central to Trump's second term, with him being used as kind of the useful idiot to advance these Federalist Society aims. So also that'll be in the ether, right? I mean, over the next 3 days, we could have all these cases decided, and there's a chance that, say tomorrow, Wednesday morning, we could get some of these big cases, and then all of a sudden, these two are debating Thursday night, right? So, there are some
I'm
X
trying to
factors.
yeah, no, I'm trying to think which are the ones that I mean, I hadn't even really put that together in my head, frankly. Like I don't know. Okay, let's assume that, which I do assume, it'll be what you said, that they'll say there's a limited scope of immunity for presidents, and they will sketch out a framework of what counts and what doesn't, sends it back to the trial court to kind of work, go through blah 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 blah. Okay, now how does that land in a debate context? I don't know, because like on one sense it's like a win for Trump, and winning is winning, and it kind of validates his arguments to the extent that your pals on the Supreme Court throwing you a bone validates, but it's not gonna be, I don't know, it's not clear to me that, like, you go, like, let's say they release that case Thursday morning, right? So just hours to for everybody to react, make sense of it. I'm not sure everybody's like, whoa, man, this is a hot potato, don't know how I'm going to address this. It's very technical. It doesn't say Trump's innocent. It gives him like a delay factor. It's not something, just in the nature of things, again, because Biden's a normal politician, he's not going to say, fuck that, man, we shouldn't have lost that. He can't like get on his high horse because he's the president and blah 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 blah. So I'm not sure how that one really, it's very consequential. It's not clear to me how it lands. I mean, if you had, like, in a different universe where Dobbs comes down the day of the debate, right? I mean, that's like unimaginable. And there are I mean, tell us about what EMTALA, what is it? Tell us about that. Walk us through that.
The fundamental question there is whether a federal statute that emergency rooms are required to provide stabilizing care to all patients that come in, no matter any other factors, whether the patient can pay for it, whatnot. They must give stabilizing care to everyone who comes into their emergency rooms, whether that supersedes state abortion bans. So if a woman comes in and needs an abortion to be stabilized, if that trumps Idaho's very draconian, life of the woman type exemption. And so,
Right.
what we're fighting over is somewhat granular here, because if Idaho only lets you do an abortion when there's impending death, we've gotten into this before. This is why these exceptions don't work. When is death impending? When is it impending enough? And that's
Right.
why the federal statute is read to sweep more broadly, because you're stabilizing them, right? You're getting someone in a critical condition, and you are getting them into a safer place. So that's what the fight's about. And as we kind of discussed on a previous episode, the kind of women we're talking about here are the most sympathetic cases, right? This is all going to be far along in the pregnancy. It's often going to be women who have already had children. They're crisis situations, right? Where if you're in this kind of tragic situation, the fetus is almost always not going to survive. So then you're just left with kind of saving the woman's life. And unlike mifepristone, I would be shocked if the court doesn't come down on Idaho's side in this one. They were really kind of aggressive during oral arguments. They were getting really mad at the liberal justices for bringing in these kind of real world examples of, women kind of bleeding out in parking lots or being sent away and then coming back when they were closer to death. So we'll see. I mean, the way I kind of
That
framed it in my piece is that they tried to create this anti-abortion fantasy land where this is not the direct result of getting rid of abortion care. So it's funny to hear you talk about the immunity thing, because it almost makes me think that this case landing right before the debate might have a bigger
I
immediate
I
impact.
I think it could. Anything I mean, we have all seen, and I say this not wanting to have it seem like I'm reducing this to its political, or electoral impact, but we have seen that the most vulnerable point for, anti-abortion advocacy are these cases where women either are risking profound harm, death, whatever, and it's sort of like, I'm an anti, either the conscience of the doctor or the state law or something like that. So it's funny. Maybe we can kind of run through the cases quickly to kind of think of them, what their impact might be on the debate. That one, if Idaho wins that one, that's pretty explosive, I think, for the debate, because that is not what the Republicans want to be talking about. To put it mildly, they don't want to be talking about abortion at all. We know that. But this idea that you come in and you're bleeding to death, and the doctor decides that somehow stitching you up, so to speak, it constitutes an abortion, and they're like, sorry, sorry it didn't pan out for you. That's look, I mean, these laws are terrible. As we discussed, I think in the last pod, this isn't just a case where you need to, health of the mother. So you get into a case with, does it count of life and health of the mother if the woman has a good chance of liver damage or kidney damage or something like that over the course of her pregnancy? When the standard of stabilizing someone is very low standard. That basically just means you get them so they are not going to quickly decompensate and die, so they can be like transferred to another hospital. So I that would be pretty intense to have that, kind of served up right before the debate. What are some of the others? Let's go through. Can we go through them just quickly?
So a lot of them are administrative state. The big one is they could overturn Chevron, which would be a huge deal, but
no one would have
it's
any
hard.
idea what it means.
It's hard for me to see that making a splash at the debate, even though it should. And then one that could potentially be a big deal is Fisher, which is the one on the obstruction charge that's been used in a ton of the January 6th insurrectionist cases, and which has Trump salience because two of the charges in Jack Smith's case are grounded in the same obstruction statute.
And this is the one about like changing a federal, like disrupting a federal
that's right
process or something like that, right?
And whether that the kind of catch-all provision applies to them trying to stop the electoral count, or if it's a more narrow thing where it only applies to destroying physical evidence, which Jack Smith has tried to do a kind of an end run around by saying like, well, there was also the fake elector scheme, so we're covered either way. But you can see that if that comes down, that would almost certainly be kind of woven into what are, there's already going to be a prepared section on January 6th. So I'm sure that would come up if that gets decided.
What is hard to know there is that if the court decides in essence in Trump's favor, that would be outrageous, but it's also kind of a win for him, right? So it's kind of it's not clear what impact, at least to me, it's not clear what impact it has in an electoral context, in a debate context, because Trump goes in and said, Biden can say terrible Supreme Court, blah blah blah. Trump can say, hey, I was unjustly accused, and this is just Supreme Court saying what I've said all along, that I'm innocent and this is rigged and blah 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 blah. And that's nonsense, but at least in the sort of the sort of the dynamics of a debate, that works for you. You're
Right.
vindicated in some sense, right?
Even though you would think that the kind of Biden retort to that would be so easy, right? You would stay away from kind of the legal weediness and be like, these people attacked our seat of government, you know? And
Yeah.
I think that's something that to normal people, they're not out there kind of parsing the obstruction terms, you know?
Yeah. No, I think it's not. I think Biden will say that. I think that is effective. It's more just that Trump will have something he can say too.
Yeah.
And that will be very satisfying to his people, and satisfying to some of that slice of the electorate that is up for grabs, that maybe feels uncertain about these cases. Is this really just Biden, using the Justice Department, blah 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 blah? Where it's very different from in that abortion case, where you just said, okay, Supreme Court says it's cool if that woman dies, because the kind of the legislature of Idaho says that's just, she's out of luck. And like, Trump doesn't have a good response to that. I mean, is he going to pull we're leaving it up to the states? If you're a kill state, that's up to, there's that's just a, I guarantee you the Trump campaign is hoping that comes down on Friday.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and it also one of those situations where if it doesn't come down tomorrow and it doesn't come down Thursday, there's going to be a lot of that conspiracy theory tinged speculation we see around the Supreme Court. That's like, was this planned to come down on this day?
We used to have this, kind of fantasy, and it was always a fantasy. They're the Supreme Court. They are so high up in the ether. They don't even have a TV. They don't even know what TV is, right? They're just up there thinking about the Constitution and stuff like this. But like, it's been clear for a very long time that is not the case. But given what we have learned and continue learning about Alito and Thomas and the others, man, Alito's, he's probably got a debate party with his own debate flag set up just for the watch party, right? I mean, it's so like, could they hold one back? Of course they could. I mean, frankly, how could they not? I mean, at least as I'm understanding it, there's no system where you have to put them in the order they were argued or anything. I mean, I guess in theory, it's just you don't want to release them all in one day. And again, in theory, maybe Kavanaugh's still doing a few edits on one, but come on, they're done. And it's how could they not, right? When you think about it, how could they not?
I mean, some people were speculating because for a while, Wednesday was the only release day this week, which is strange when we're at this point in the calendar with so many left. And for a while, the speculation was, are they trying to avoid the debate on purpose and just kind of steer clear of it altogether to avoid this kind of speculation? But, we'll see.
It certainly wouldn't surprise me if there's some funny business there, because again, it's not even like, at least as I understand it, it's not even like you have to tip the scales. There's no scale. It's just totally up to them when they want to release each one. So, who knows? We'll see soon enough. So there's we've got a lot of these cases coming down. There's kind of this extra level of question about how it might interact with the debate itself. Whether there's possibility of some funny business on the margins. We have, when we're back on the next pod, we'll talk about the primary results of this that are tonight when we are recording. We'll also talk to you about the debate. There's a chance we may bring you an Instapod on Thursday night, but kind of on those nights where everybody's doing a lot of writing and everything. So not certain, but we may do that, especially if there's something that comes out of the debate particularly insane that we just feel we need to discuss. So look forward to that. And if we do not have one, then we will be back and talk to you next Wednesday. And I think that's all we got.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.